My name is Lacey, and I am 32 years old. The night I told my mother I was going to marry a man who fixed cars for a living, she put down her fork, looked at the 7-year-old girl sitting quietly at the end of our table, and said, carefully, like she had practiced it, "That child is not our problem to absorb." She wasn't talking to Rue, she was talking about her. Rue was 7. She had spent the entire dinner using the salad fork for everything, because she didn't want to ask which one was right. She went still when my mother said it, the way children go still when they understand the temperature of a room, even if they cannot name the weather. My mother gave me my options before dessert: walk out with her or don't come back. She said it in her gentlest voice, which was how she did everything cruel, with the tone of someone being perfectly reasonable. I stayed at the table. My husband-to-be reached over and put his hand flat next to mine, not on it, just next to it, like a door held open. We left together, the three of us, and I have not regretted a single day of the 6 years that followed. What I regret is how long it took me to stop grieving the family I thought I had. To understand why my mother could say that about a child, you have to understand the house I grew up in. My parents had a 4-bedroom colonial in a suburb of Charlotte, with good schools and a lake house they called the property, like it was a private estate. My mother cared about one thing more than anything else: how things looked from the road, what neighborhood, what school, what kind of car in the driveway, whether the story of our family was one she could tell at church without lowering her voice. My brother Spencer was 4 years older and had, in my mother's telling, never once made a wrong step. He was the one with the framed photos. He was the one they drove 3 hours to watch play college lacrosse. When he got engaged, my mother cried at the restaurant and called it the best day of her life. When the engagement dissolved 2 years later, without an announcement, we stopped talking about Spencer's personal life, the way our family stopped talking about anything that didn't make us look right. My father loved me quietly. I want to be fair to him because it matters. He never once raised his voice at me. He also never once stood in front of me when it counted. When my mother was building toward something, he had a habit of finding a task in another room: the garage, the back porch. I learned to read the sound of him leaving. It meant the conversation was already settled, even if no one had spoken yet. I worked at the county deed and title office, processing real property transfers, pulling chain of title records, matching what people claimed to own against what was actually on file. I spent my days finding the gap between what someone believed and what the document said. It was careful, quiet work, and I was good at it. My husband walked in on a Wednesday in February to dispute a lien on a property his landlord owned. He set a manila folder on my counter and said he wasn't looking for special treatment, just for someone to actually read what was filed versus what the landlord was claiming. He had grease under his fingernails that he'd tried to scrub out before coming in, and he was polite the way people are polite when they don't have time to perform it. In the chair by the window, a small girl sat with a library book, reading with the complete focus of someone who had learned to make herself invisible in waiting rooms. Her name was Rue. She was 6. While I pulled the lien records, she held up her book without looking away from the page and showed me the cover: a field guide to North American trees. "There's a whole chapter on dead ones," she told me, like this was critical information. Dead trees are actually more useful to some animals than live ones. I told her that was an interesting way to look at it. She nodded, very serious. "It's just true," she said. I didn't know it then, but I had just met the person who would eventually teach me more about paying attention than anyone else in my life. He was not a romantic prospect I talked myself into. He ran a small restoration shop out of a converted warehouse off the interstate. Vintage and classic vehicle work, American muscle from the 60s and 70s. He had debts from buying the building, A truck he kept running through the same stubborn mechanical loyalty he applied to everything, and a daughter whose mother had decided, when Rue was 11 months old, that the life she'd imagined wasn't the one she was living. She left. He didn't chase her, and didn't talk badly about her. He just said she needed something different, and that Rue would know when she was older that it wasn't about her. He told me on our second real conversation that he was a complicated investment. He said it plainly, like he was reading from a disclosure form. I had grown up watching people in my family refuse to admit any limitation at all. Here was a man laying his out on the table so I could decide with accurate information. That was the thing that got me. I fell for him slowly, and for Rue even more slowly, because she didn't make it easy, and I understood why. She had a system. When I came around, she would drift to the window of whatever room we were in and check the driveway. Not obviously, just a small, quiet look. She wasn't asking if I would stay. She was documenting whether I did. So I stopped making promises and started showing up, month after month. And one afternoon, I was helping her research something for a school project on which local tree species survived wind storms, and which ones snapped, and she leaned against my arm without noticing she was doing it. She had stopped checking the window. The dinner with my parents came in early spring. I told myself if they just met him, if they just saw her, the warmth would have to win. I should have listened to the part of me that already knew. My mother asked him 4 questions about his work, each phrased like she was interviewing a contractor for a job she hadn't decided she wanted. My brother watched from across the table with an expression I couldn't name then but understand completely now. My father made himself busy twice before we even sat down. Rue tried to stay invisible and mostly succeeded until dessert, when I told them we were engaged. My mother did not look at me. She looked at Rue. And she said it, not to the child, about her, as though Rue were a line item being discussed, not a person sitting at the table. That child is not our problem to absorb. Rue was 7 and not stupid. She understood the temperature. Later in the kitchen, my mother gave me the quieter version while my father found something to do in the garage. Then she reached for the sentence she would use for the next 6 years. Think about your father's heart, Lacey. He doesn't need this stress right now. Not with what the doctors have been saying. That was the first time I heard about my father's heart. I didn't know yet that a health scare, kept vague enough, can function like a leash. We got married that summer in our neighbor, Fern's backyard. Fern was 64, a retired occupational therapist who had decided without consulting anyone to become whatever our little family needed. She lent us her garden and her good tablecloth and cried from the first song. My husband's army buddy Cruz showed up with a cooler and a folding table and spent most of the reception arguing with the string lights, which kept shorting. Rue threw flower petals like it was a professional assignment, and she intended to be excellent at it. Before the ceremony, my husband said something I've held on to. He said, "If your family ever comes around, we open the door. I am not going to be the reason you lost them." He meant it. For 6 years, he kept that door unlocked even when I was ready to seal it shut. I mailed my parents an invitation. It came back 2 weeks later, unopened. My name crossed out in my mother's handwriting, stamped return to sender. No note. I kept it anyway. I slid it into the fireproof document box I kept on the top shelf of our closet, where I kept the things that mattered and tried not to look at it too often. Then the phone calls started. Not to me, about me. My aunt called to say she was praying for my dad and hoped I could find my way back before it was too late. A cousin texted asking how I could do this when my father was already carrying so much. My mother had been busy. She had built a story, and the story was that I had walked away from a man with a serious heart condition to be with someone who fixed old cars. I believed it, That is the part that still catches in my throat when I sit with it. I was cut off. I had no way to check. The guilt did exactly what it was designed to do. Why would a mother lie about her husband's health? It was too monstrous to manufacture from nothing, so I assumed there was something real underneath it, and I carried the weight. If you've ever been handed someone else's version of you and been expected to live inside it, drop a comment. I read everyone. And subscribe if you want to stay for what comes next, because this story is not over yet. Rue felt it too, in her way. A few months after the wedding, she came to find me folding laundry and stood in the doorway and asked very carefully, "Did they not like me?" I put down what I was holding. She was 7. I did not give her a speech. I said, "They have a problem with who they are. That is not about you." And then I did the thing that mattered more than words. The next morning, I added her to my emergency contact list at the school district. I labeled her backpack with a tag that had both our names on it. She read it at breakfast and didn't say anything, but she carried that backpack like it was documentation of something real, because it was. That night she made a drawing of our street, every house carefully labeled. Some in green. A few in yellow. She handed it to me with the gravity of someone delivering an official report. "It's a safety map," she said, "so we know who to call if something goes wrong." I put it on the refrigerator. I had no idea I would one day lay it on a table as the last thing I said. The early years were lean in the specific grinding way that doesn't make good stories, but builds something real in the people living them. 2 car payments and a stretched mortgage, and my husband leaving before sunrise and coming home smelling like metal and solvent. But we were building something. He was obsessive about quality, methodical and patient, and word moved through the vintage restoration community that Strickland Auto did work other shops couldn't replicate. There was one night that told me who we were going to be. Rue spiked a fever, high and fast. My husband was 4 hours away from finishing a transport job he couldn't walk off without losing the contract keeping us current on the mortgage. And at the same time, my work phone was lighting up with a deed audit that needed immediate attention, the kind that determines whether you get promoted or quietly sidelined. I looked at the phone. I looked at Rue, 8 years old, shivering under 2 blankets. I turned the phone face down. I stayed on the floor by her bed until the fever broke near 4 in the morning. I lost the recognition at work. Rue, half asleep, put her hand on my arm and said, "You stayed the whole time." Just that. She had been keeping a record since the day we met. The exclusions came on a schedule after that. Every holiday I tried, cards sent, numbers dialed, messages left, all of it returned or ignored. The worst ones were the cards Rue mailed. Starting when she was 8, she sent my parents a birthday card every year. She picked them out herself at the drugstore, took her time, wrote something inside in her careful handwriting. She never asked me if it was a good idea. She just did it, on her own, because she had decided it was what you did. Every single one came back, returned to sender, stamped over her name. I kept them all. A rubber band around the stack in the document box, and every year the weight grew, and every year Rue mailed another one without ever mentioning the ones that had come back. When she was 11, she found out what had been said at that first dinner. Someone told her at a birthday party. She came home and stood in the kitchen doorway and said, in the flattest voice I had ever heard from her, "She called me something that means you don't want to carry it." I looked it up. She did not cry in front of me. She went to her room. I gave her an hour. Then I knocked and sat on the floor outside her door and said, "You are the reason I stayed. Everything I built here started with you. Don't let anyone make you forget that." She slid a piece of paper under the door. A new safety map. Bigger this time. More houses added, all carefully labeled. There was a crack in the story once before I was ready to face it. My aunt let something slip during a call. A throwaway reference to my father's golf league, how he'd shot his best round of the year. She caught herself and moved on. A man who needs careful cardiac monitoring does not shoot his best golf round of the year. I wrote the date in my notebook and set it next to the other notes I'd been keeping, and then I told myself I must have misunderstood because the alternative meant my mother had spent years weaponizing a health scare to keep me exiled and guilty. I was not ready to open that door yet. I opened it eventually, but it took the photograph. Meanwhile, my husband's work did what patient and excellent work does over time. He had spent years developing a process for treating rust and metal fatigue in vintage American frames, a combination of proven techniques and modern polymer compounds that produced results other shops couldn't touch. He had it documented and tested. In 2023, he filed licensing paperwork. In early 2024, a regional automotive aftermarket company bought the rights to use the process commercially across their service network. The deal was announced publicly. The valuation attached to the business in the announcement was $18 million. What the announcement did not say was that nearly all of it lived in contract terms and equity structures that would not convert to actual cash for another 2 years. We had a good life. We did not have $18 million in the bank. But the headline said, 18 million. My brother texted within 48 hours. Warm, nostalgic. He mentioned a summer at the lake when we were kids. He said he'd missed me. 3 messages in. He worked his way around to asking how the deal had actually structured out, just out of curiosity, because he'd always believed in my husband's vision and wondered whether there was room for family involvement going forward. I read it twice. Then I went into my phone and found a text from 3 years earlier that I had never deleted. Different opener, same warmth, same slow pivot. That time he'd needed me to co-sign a line of credit for a real estate venture with temporary cash flow friction. I'd said no, and he'd gone quiet for 8 months. I set the 2 texts side by side like documents. Same structure, same childhood memory in the opener, same soft pivot to money. Our attorney, a woman named Sandra who had handled the licensing paperwork and who I had told the whole family situation to, because I recognized in her a fellow keeper of careful records. She had said something months earlier that I hadn't fully understood yet. She said, "People like your mother eventually put what they want in writing. When they finally believe you have something worth taking, they document the ask. Wait for that." Then, she wrote 3 words on her notepad and underlined them. Wait for the letter. 6 weeks after the announcement, on a Saturday morning, my mother's car pulled into our driveway. My brother's rental was behind it. My mother had a folder. I noticed it before anything else. The corners were soft with handling, the edges worn. Whatever was inside had been prepared and revised long before she drove 2 states to see me. We sat in the living room. My husband offered coffee. My mother looked around at our house and priced it with her eyes the way she had always priced things. Then, she folded her hands on top of the folder and said, in her gentlest voice, that it was time to heal the family. That healing meant being fair about what everyone had contributed and sacrificed. She slid the folder across the table. She had typed it. $300,000, she read aloud. Toward restoration of the family home, costs we were well positioned to absorb now. Given our good fortune. A senior operations position for Spencer at the company, given his connections in the Charlotte market. $4,000 a month in ongoing support for my father's cardiac care, which had been significant and largely unacknowledged. And a final item, a statement shared with the extended family that I had come home, that I had reconciled with my parents and returned. My husband picked up the folder. He read it the way he reads everything, without rushing, going back when he needed to, taking it seriously. His eyes moved to one line near the bottom and then stayed there. A small smile touched the corner of his mouth. Not a cruel one. Not triumph. The specific expression of a man who has just watched someone hand him the exact thing he could not have obtained on his own. He set the folder down. Perfect, he said quietly. You just put it in writing. Now Sandra has everything she needs. My mother's face changed. For one held beat, she stopped breathing. She reached for the folder the way you reach for something you've just realized you shouldn't have set down. My brother looked between us, not understanding yet. I opened the document box. I did not have a prepared speech. I only knew the order things needed to come out in, because I had been keeping them in that order for 6 years. I took out the photograph first. My cousin had sent it to me 3 months earlier, a picture from a 4th of July gathering. My father standing at a grill, laughing, holding tongs, his color good, his posture easy and relaxed. I laid it over the line about his cardiac care. He's fine, Mom, I said. He has been fine. You took a real scare and kept it alive in the telling because a recovered father is no use to you. A sick father is a reason for me to feel guilty and stay away without asking questions. You kept him sick in the story because it kept me exiled, and you just submitted a request for $4,000 a month for care that stopped being necessary years ago. In your own handwriting, on a document Sandra is going to find very useful. My mother started to say something about follow-up appointments, about ongoing monitoring. I let her get 3 sentences in. He had an arrhythmia event in 2018, I said. Real, frightening. And then he had an ablation procedure and his cardiologist cleared him. You never corrected the story after that, because the story was doing work for you. My brother jumped in then. He didn't defend the timeline. He pivoted to fairness, to family, to how difficult everything had been for everyone. And in the middle of it, he said the sentence that let me see the whole shape of what was underneath. He said, "You have $18 million, Lacey. We're not asking for much. We're just asking you to take care of your own family." I took out my phone. I pulled up his text from 3 years ago and his text from 6 weeks ago, and I read them out loud back to back. The same opener, the same childhood memory, used like a passkey, the same soft turn toward money. You have a script, I said. You ran it on me when your real estate deal went sideways, and you are running it again. This is not a reunion. It is a pitch. His silence was its own kind of answer. I looked at my mother. You want 2 things on the same page, I said. You want me to pay you back for raising me, and you want me to stand in front of everyone and announce that I came home. But you have also spent 6 years telling anyone who would listen that I's abandoned a sick father. You cannot collect a debt from someone you have already buried. You cannot present a dying man and then hand me his medical bills. Pick one story. You put both of them in your own handwriting. I set the rubber-banded stack of cards on top of the folder. 6 years of birthday cards, each one addressed in a child's handwriting, each one stamped return to sender. She sent these herself, I said. She picked them out. She wrote something in every one. She was 8 years old the first time, and you sent them back, every year, without opening a single one. I let them look. Something in my mother's face gave way, just slightly, just at the edges, like a surface that has held too long. She looked like a person standing at the rim of a truth she wasn't ready to say. Then my husband's phone rang on the coffee table. He looked at the screen and held it out to me. My father. I stepped into the hallway. My father's voice was careful in the way that means he has chosen his words ahead of time. He said he had found out about the meeting. He said he knew about the folder. He said he needed me to hear something directly from him before anything else happened. I was cleared in 2019, he said. The procedure worked. My cardiologist signed off. And I let your mother keep telling the story because fighting her on it was harder than letting it go. That was mine to own, not hers. I should have called you. I should have called 100 times. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't mention his age, or how much time any of us had left. He didn't ask to be let back in, as if nothing had happened. He just named, specifically and clearly, what he had done. I went back into the living room. My mother made one more attempt to gather the folder and her composure at the same time. My brother tried once more, to make it about fairness, about need. I took out Rue's safety map, the original one from when she was 8. Our street, every house labeled, the green ones she had decided were worth watching over. I laid it on top of everything on the table. She drew this when she was 8 years old, I said, because she wanted to know who was safe and who wasn't. She made it so we would know who to protect. You are not on it. She didn't put you on it. Even at 8, she already knew. I told them plainly what would and would not happen. There would be no $300,000. There would be no position for my brother. There would be no monthly payments for care that had not been medically necessary for years. The family home was their property and their responsibility, and its problems were theirs to solve. Sandra's letter would go to the extended family, not their version. The documented version, what had been said, what had been sent back, marked return to sender, what had been written in their own handwriting in that worn folder. The letter would make clear that the narrative about my father's health and my abandonment was to stop. And because of the folder, the letter would have weight. They left with less than they came in with. My mother straightened her coat. My brother followed. Neither of them said what a person says when they understand they were wrong. My father called again that evening. We talked for close to an hour. He did not deflect. He did not use his health or his age or the years he had left as leverage. He named what he had allowed and said it was his fault, not my mother's. He asked at the end whether we might meet sometime, somewhere between our lives, on my terms, whenever I was ready, if I was ever ready. I told him that was the right way to ask, that I would think about it. He said he understood. It was 3 months before Rue asked me directly what had happened. She was 13, and I had given her the outline, the parts a 13-year-old should have. She sat with it for a few days, the way she sits with everything. And then she came into the kitchen one evening while my husband was burning garlic at the stove, and I was going through paperwork at the table, and she said, almost to the room rather than to either of us, I looked that word up again, the one she used. I looked it up differently this time. She picked up the stack of returned cards from the counter where I'd left them. You kept all of these, she said. Every single one. She was quiet for a moment. Then, so I was never what she said I was. I was just the part they chose not to make room for. That's a different thing. That's their problem. She set the cards down carefully, the way she sets down things she has decided to be done with. I was just family, she said. You just had to prove it the long way. She shrugged then. The teenager shrug. The one that means something large and doesn't want you to make it strange. I had the safety map framed. It hangs by our front door now. Green labels and yellow ones, and one corner, Rue updated herself last year to add Fern's house with 2 stars, because Fern comes over every Sunday and stays through dinner and never once made anyone feel like something to be absorbed or discarded. People ask me sometimes whether the money fixed it. It didn't. The money was locked on paper for most of the story, and it never healed a single thing that mattered. What fixed it was smaller and harder to explain. It was a man who kept a door open for 6 years, without once making me feel guilty for needing it there. It was a retired neighbor who decided without being asked that our daughter was also hers. It was an army buddy who fixed string lights at midnight because someone had to. It was a girl who tested whether I would stay, and one day stopped checking the window, and eventually stopped needing the test at all. Family is not who raised you. It is not blood, and it is not the people who kept a receipt for doing it and expected to be paid with interest when the time was right. Family is who is still in the room when you have nothing to offer and who wants nothing from you when you suddenly have everything. If you are carrying guilt that someone handed you, like it was yours by right, guilt that has been mailed to you with your name, crossed out, and returned to sender, I want you to know the thing it took me 6 years and a fireproof box to understand. You are allowed to read the actual document. You are allowed to put what you find on the table. And you are allowed to hold both keys yourself, the one that keeps the door closed and the one that opens it just enough for the people who have earned the crack. Stay for the next one. There is always another story, and there is always someone finally setting down a weight they were never meant to carry in the first place.